Imagine this: one suitcase, one plane ticket, and a final sip of that pumpkin spice latte before you trade it all for fresh mangoes plucked straight from the tree in Ghana. At first, it might sound like a whimsical vacation daydream, but for thousands of African Americans, every year this is no daydream. It's a choice, a migration, a quiet revolution that mainstream headlines whisper about but rarely explain. For generations, America sold itself as the land of opportunity. Yet for many African Americans, that promise has always carried an invisible tax: the stress of being questioned, watched, doubted, or dismissed simply because of the color of your skin. Every glance from a store clerk, every routine traffic stop, every resume that never earned a callback. These tiny weights stack up over decades until the burden feels unbearable. And when the math no longer adds up, when the so-called dream begins to look more like survival, many are asking the unthinkable: why stay in a system stacked against you when a new life is possible elsewhere? This movement is not just about leaving America. It is about returning to something larger, deeper, and older than any passport. From Ghana's year of return in 2019 to the surge of digital nomads finding homes in Nairobi, Lagos, or Kigali, the diaspora is discovering a possibility their ancestors were denied to come back on their own terms. So here's the real question for you today. Is this wave of return migration simply a lifestyle trend? Or is it a powerful shift that could redefine both America's future and Africa's destiny? And if thousands are already writing their own rules abroad, what does that say about the promises America has yet to keep? Stay with us, because in the next few minutes, we're going to peel back the curtain on a story that might make you rethink the meaning of opportunity, home, and belonging. Please share this video if you feel you're one of the first to recognize this awakening. And subscribe if you believe the truth matters more than the headlines. For many African Americans, the American dream was supposed to be a promise, a guarantee that hard work would deliver stability, dignity, and a better life for their children. But in reality, it often feels like a contract written in invisible ink. Day after day, small wounds pile up. A young man is pulled over for no reason on the freeway. A woman's resume is quietly discarded because her name sounds different. A teenager walking home from school is followed through a store as if she were a suspect, not a customer. None of these moments make front-page news, but together they create what some now call an invisible tax, not paid to the IRS but collected in stress, anxiety, and the heavy toll of being Black in America. That weight, carried silently for generations, has led many to look for an exit. And increasingly, the exit doors point not to Florida or Arizona, but across the Atlantic back to Africa. What once seemed unimaginable has become an undeniable pattern, a migration wave flowing in reverse. Instead of Africans leaving their continent to chase opportunity abroad, African Americans are now leaving the United States to chase opportunity and dignity in Africa. It began with symbolic steps. In 2019, Ghana launched its Year of Return, inviting descendants of enslaved Africans to visit, reconnect, and reflect. What started as a cultural celebration quickly became something much bigger. Over 1 million people showed up. They walked through the infamous door of no return, the archway where enslaved Africans were forced onto ships centuries ago. And for many, it became a door of return. Tears were shed, prayers whispered, songs sung. It was not just tourism, it was history closing a wound, even if only for a moment. But beyond the spiritual dimension, there is also a strikingly practical one. Africa today is not the Africa of outdated stereotypes shown in charity commercials. Across the continent, cities like Lagos, Nairobi, Accra, and Kigali are becoming hubs of energy, innovation, and growth. Africa now holds some of the fastest-growing economies in the world. Tech startups are sprouting from Nigeria. Rwanda is positioning itself as a digital hub for entrepreneurs. Ghana is rolling out policies to attract diaspora investments. Everywhere you look, there are signs of momentum. For African Americans facing glass ceilings in U.S. corporations, this momentum feels like fresh air. In America, they often hit walls of subtle but rigid discrimination. In Africa, many describe walking into open fields markets eager for new businesses, governments ready to offer incentives, and communities willing to welcome them as family. It's not just about what you escape. It's about what you gain the chance to build, belong, and breathe without the constant pressure of proving your worth. Cost of living adds another layer to the decision. A cramped one-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn can swallow $3,000 each month. That same amount in cities like Dar es Salaam or Kigali could cover a spacious three-bedroom house, perhaps with a garden, and even household help. Food that costs a premium in America simply because it's labeled organic is just food in Africa, fresh, local, and affordable. Healthcare, while not without challenges, can cost a fraction of what Americans pay out of pocket. Even commuting feels different, not hours wasted on clogged interstates, but 10-minute rides or even the ability to work from a home-based office. Taken together, these elements create a powerful equation. On one side, the weight of an American system that too often fails to deliver its promises. On the other, a continent that, despite its own challenges, offers opportunity, dignity, and a sense of belonging. For many, the decision to move is not reckless but logical, not defeat but survival, not escape but return. And this is the core of the story. What looks to some like leaving America is in truth returning home. For centuries, family trees of African Americans were torn apart, branches cut off, languages silenced, names erased. Now, with DNA tests pointing the way, with governments opening doors, and with economies ready to grow, the descendants of those who were taken are finding their way back, not in chains, but with choice, not in silence, but with voices lifted. This is no passing trend. It is a movement, one that speaks to the failures of America and the rebirth of Africa. The turning point in this story is not found in statistics or housing comparisons. It is found in a doorway. A stone arch on the coast of Ghana known as the Door of No Return. For centuries, this was the threshold where men, women, and children were forced onto ships, leaving behind families, languages, and futures. That door symbolized finality, the last glimpse of African soil before chains and oceans swallowed lives whole. But in 2019, during Ghana's Year of Return, something remarkable happened. Thousands of African Americans stood at that same doorway. They touched its walls, they prayed, they cried. And for many, it was no longer the door of no return. It became the door of return. A passage back not just to a place, but to a sense of wholeness stolen generations ago. The symbolism was so powerful that even those who did not cross the ocean themselves felt its weight through television and social media. For the first time in modern history, the descendants of the enslaved were not only welcome, but invited to walk back in. That is not poetic fluff. That is history bending on itself. The emotional reaction was immediate and profound. Imagine hearing a drum rhythm in a Ghanaian village that feels strangely like your grandmother's humming in a Chicago kitchen. Imagine tasting a dish of spiced rice and beans that triggers a memory you didn't even know you carried. For many, it felt as if their DNA finally exhaled. Generations of disconnection, of names erased and languages silenced, suddenly met a spark of recognition. This wasn't just travel, it was healing in motion. And the governments of Africa noticed. Ghana's Year of Return became more than a tourism campaign. It became a model. Rwanda soon positioned itself as a hub for digital nomads and returning diaspora, offering streamlined visas and modern infrastructure. Senegal too began crafting policies to draw returnees, recognizing that this was not charity but strategy. Skills capital and global networks are treasures that the diaspora carries with them, and African nations are realizing they can transform these into engines of development. Land grants, tax holidays, and simplified residency are not just perks, they are investments in a shared future. Meanwhile, the reaction from the diaspora community has been equally telling. People who once saw Africa only through the lens of National Geographic documentaries are now starting businesses, buying land, and enrolling their children in local schools. Some create hybrid identities, African roots mixed with American hustle, serving as bridges that connect two continents. They bring American business acumen into African markets and export African culture, food, and music back to the United States. Suddenly, the return isn't just personal, it's geopolitical. And while Africa is opening its arms, America is feeling the loss. Each departure of a teacher, a doctor, an engineer, or an entrepreneur is not just an individual choice. It is a silent critique of the American system. It says, if you cannot value me here, I will go where I am valued. That message, spoken not in protests but in packed suitcases and one-way tickets, rings louder than any political slogan. In Washington, Paris, and London, policymakers have begun to take notice, even if quietly. They understand that a reverse brain drain shifts power balances. Africa is no longer simply losing talent, it is regaining it. And that shift rattles old assumptions about who owns the future. Of course, the movement is not without skeptics. Some worry that returnees romanticize Africa and may struggle with realities like power outages, bureaucracy, or cultural adjustment. And yes, integration is not instant. But here again, the response has been revealing. Instead of discouragement, many returnees see these gaps as opportunities. Diaspora entrepreneurs are founding solar energy companies to address outages, logistics apps, to tackle delivery issues, and private schools to strengthen education. They are not only adapting, but transforming obstacles into legacies. This is the high tide of the story, a movement that began in pain and disillusionment, now swelling into a wave of renewal and reinvention. What started as survival has grown into strategy. What began as healing has become momentum. And in both America and Africa, the ripple effects are only beginning to be felt. When thousands of people quietly pack their bags and choose to leave America for Africa, it is not simply a private decision. It is a civic tremor, a political statement, and in many ways a referendum on two continents. The consequences ripple far beyond the households involved. They reshape communities, economies, and the language of identity itself. For African American communities still in the United States, the departure of friends, neighbors, and family members sends a powerful message that waiting for reforms is no longer the only option. Watching a cousin thrive in Accra or a retired teacher build a home in Dar es Salaam forces others to question the stability of their own American lives. It sparks debates in churches, neighborhood associations, and family gatherings. Should we stay and fight for change here, or do we seek dignity elsewhere? That question alone is a shift in civic imagination, the realization that freedom of movement is also freedom of choice. Inside America, this creates a political pressure point. If skilled and educated citizens are voting with their passports, it exposes deep cracks in the promise of equality. Every departure is an indictment of stalled reforms on policing, housing, healthcare, and racial equity. For policymakers, the phenomenon is embarrassing. How can America call itself the land of opportunity when its own children find more opportunity overseas? The symbolism stings, especially when retirees openly compare Florida golf courses with the vibrant markets and festivals of Africa and choose Africa. In Africa, however, the effects are strikingly different. For local communities, the arrival of diaspora returnees is not merely demographic, it is transformational. They bring new ideas about education, business management, healthcare delivery, and even civic engagement. A small town that welcomes returnees may suddenly see the creation of a bilingual school, a clinic staffed with foreign-trained nurses, or a cooperative exporting local crafts through online platforms. These are not abstract benefits. They are daily improvements that families can feel. At the political level, governments are learning to harness this momentum. Ghana, Rwanda, and Senegal are not just offering tax breaks or land plots as gestures. They are building national strategies around diaspora engagement. For them, the return migration is an untapped engine of development. It turns what was once seen as brain drain into a brain gain, and in the process, it strengthens the legitimacy of governments that can show visible results. Leaders can point to new businesses, infrastructure projects, or cultural festivals fueled by the diaspora and say, "We are building the future together." There is also a symbolic weight in this process that cannot be ignored. For centuries, the narrative of Africa in global politics was one of loss of people-stolen resources, extracted, and cultures suppressed. But the sight of African Americans returning flips that narrative on its head. Instead of loss, there is gain. Instead of exile, there is homecoming. That symbolism translates into political capital. African leaders can stand on global stages and highlight that their continent is no longer simply a source of labor, but a destination of choice. Internationally, this creates subtle but significant shifts. In Washington and European capitals, the reverse migration is seen as a critique of Western models. It unsettles the assumption that prosperity flows only one way from developed nations to the global South. Suddenly, the flow is reversing, and with it the balance of soft power. Africa gains not only talent but also credibility as a land of rising opportunity. America, meanwhile, faces uncomfortable questions about whether it can still claim moral authority on equality and human rights when its own citizens quietly seek belonging elsewhere. In short, the civic and political consequences of this movement extend in every direction. For families, it reshapes conversations around belonging. For governments, it redefines strategy. For international politics, it shifts the narrative of who owns the future. What began as a personal search for dignity has become a collective force with the power to rewrite history. From Washington's perspective, every departure of an African American professional is more than a lost citizen. It is a warning flare. America prides itself on being the beacon of opportunity, but when teachers, engineers, doctors, and retirees quietly choose to relocate, it undercuts that narrative. Policymakers may not say it aloud, but the symbolism is painful. A country built on immigration is now watching emigration, and not just of the desperate, but of the determined. For decades, America has told the world that its strength lies in diversity, that anyone, regardless of background, could find a path upward. Yet, the steady stream of African Americans leaving sends a different message that inclusion has limits, that equality still feels conditional. In political debates, it is easy to talk about reform, but the image of a family building a new life in Accra or Kigali delivers a blunt critique without a single word spoken. It says, "We waited, we worked, we endured." And still the system did not change. That silent testimony is powerful because it cannot be dismissed as theory. It is lived experience turned into action. Globally, the movement is reshaping perceptions of Africa. For centuries, the continent was framed by Western media as a place to flee from a land of poverty, conflict, or disease. Now, the story is reversing. Africa is becoming a destination of choice not only for diaspora returnees, but also for investors, entrepreneurs, and even climate migrants. Tech hubs in Lagos and Nairobi attract venture capital. Kigali markets itself as the Singapore of Africa. Ghana positions itself as a cultural homeland for the diaspora. These shifts, amplified by the return migration, signal to the world that Africa is not waiting for aid, it is writing its own future. This has ripple effects on global geopolitics. In Paris and London, the sight of African Americans moving to Africa unsettles old colonial assumptions. It complicates the narrative that progress only flows through Western capitals. Instead, a reverse current emerges: knowledge, skills, and wealth flowing into Africa. That makes governments in the global north nervous because influence is not only measured in military bases or trade agreements, it is measured in talent flows. When talent chooses Africa, it boosts the continent's leverage in global negotiations. For African leaders, this moment offers both opportunity and responsibility. By embracing returnees, they gain allies who understand global systems and can build bridges between continents. But they also face the challenge of ensuring integration is smooth, that local communities see returnees not as outsiders but as family. If managed well, the return migration can accelerate national development and strengthen Pan-African identity. If mismanaged, it risks tension and division. The stakes are high, and the world is watching. Meanwhile, for ordinary Americans, particularly older generations, the trend raises unsettling questions. Many who lived through the civil rights movement believed progress was steady, that each decade was a step closer to equality. Watching their children or grandchildren seek freedom elsewhere feels like a rupture in that story. It forces a hard reflection. If the land of Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks cannot fully deliver dignity today, where does that leave the American promise? In the end, the global perspective is clear. For the West, this is a moment of reckoning. For Africa, it is a moment of renewal. And for those caught in between, it is proof that identity and opportunity are not bound by borders. The world is witnessing not just migration, but a shift in the moral geography of our time. The story of African Americans leaving the United States for Africa is more than relocation. It is a mirror, one that reflects both the cracks in America's foundation and the resilience of a people determined to reclaim dignity. What began as a trickle has become a steady current, and if history has taught us anything, currents can turn into tides. For America, the warning is clear. When those who have carried its burdens the longest, those who fought, marched, and dreamed for equality, begin to quietly exit, it should shake the conscience of the nation. Every departure whispers the same indictment: the system has not healed, the promise has not been fulfilled. If policymakers ignore this, they risk losing not only citizens, but also credibility. And once credibility erodes, power follows. For Africa, the opportunity is just as clear. This is not simply about welcoming returnees. It is about building a new chapter where the children of the diaspora can stand shoulder to shoulder with those who never left, creating societies that are stronger because they are whole. Governments must continue to open doors, but more importantly, they must protect the trust being offered by those who come back. A return migration rooted in dignity can become the cornerstone of a Pan-African renewal that reshapes the global balance of power. And for those watching, especially older generations in America, this moment carries a sobering question. If men and women who once believed in the American dream now see greater hope in Accra, Kigali, or Ouagadougou, what does that say about the dream itself? Is it broken beyond repair, or can it still be redeemed? These are not questions for tomorrow. They are questions for today. In Burkina Faso, President Ibrahim Traore often speaks about sovereignty and dignity not as abstract ideals, but as daily necessities. His reforms remind us that belonging, opportunity, and justice are not luxuries. They are the foundation of any nation's survival. So we must ask, do you think that President Ibrahim Traore's strategies for national reform are effective enough to welcome the diaspora back home? Or should Africa place its hope in a new generation of leaders to carry this mission forward? The choice to leave or to stay, to return or to build is not simple, but it is a choice, and choice itself is power. Power to reject systems that suffocate and power to create futures that heal. If this conversation has moved you, don't let it stop here. Share this video if you believe you are one of the first to recognize and support this awakening. Subscribe if you believe truth is more important than headlines, and join the discussion in the comments. Would you ever consider leaving the United States for a new life in Africa? Why or why not? Because whether you live in Atlanta, Accra, or anywhere in between, this story is no longer about them. It is about us and the future we dare to imagine together.